Mr Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, the Labor Party very strongly supports this legislation. In fact, this legislation is the outcome of the Marine Protected Area strategy that Labor introduced many years ago, back in about 2006-07. And we introduced it because we understood the lessons of the Northern Hemisphere. The Northern Hemisphere ruthlessly exploited their fisheries. They've turned their seas into marine deserts. They've wiped out species. And New Zealand wants to be a world leader in the area of protecting its marine and coastal areas. In fact, the Labor Party policy by 2020 is to achieve about 30% of the marine area under some form of protection. I have to say it's really good to be able to support something in the conservation area that the government has introduced, albeit on the back of the work that the former Labor government did, because this follows the shambles, sir, in the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area. New Zealand has a deep interest in the Antarctic and the subantarctic areas, and we were seen as a world leader in terms of protection. We held out against the tourist and mineral developments on Antarctica, and there were other countries that had a vested interest in doing it. And we opposed those things from a high moral principle, that is that we have to protect our pristine Antarctic and subantarctic areas. And yet on the Ross Sea, in order to protect something that at best was worth about $20 million in fisheries, the national government at the Kamilar meeting went in there actually demonstrating that it was no different from any other country, that if our economic or commercial interests were at stake, we'd sacrifice them. And we lost that moral leadership, Mr Speaker, and it's a real regret that we did so, because actually even in economic terms, leaving aside the critical environmental and conservation issues, even in economic terms, having Christchurch as the gateway to Antarctic is worth several $100 million a year to our economy. And by taking a principled stand in that area, we would have carried real weight in opposing the commercial exploitation of Antarctica in other ways. The United States offered a partnership for us. Our government, I think our minister probably supported that, took it to Cabinet and was rolled, and consequently we didn't go in with a joint position with the United States. In a panic we suddenly developed a position, but by that stage it was too late, and we lost the opportunity at that Kamilar meeting to do something significant in terms of the Ross Sea. And then of course we had the government turning up at a conservation meeting in Korea that was the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And there was a resolution there to protect the Maui and the Hector dolphins, the two most endangered dolphin species in the world. And what did New Zealand do under this national government? We were one of only 2 countries that opposed that additional protection. And that is a matter of absolute shame, Mr Speaker. So it's good that we're seeing a result from the earlier period under a Labor government in relation to this bill. This bill creates 3 new marine reserves in the territorial sea around 3 of New Zealand's Antarctic island groups. Those reserves are the Motere Mahue, which is literally the Maori for abandoned island, but better known perhaps as the Antipodes Island Marine Reserve, the Motere Hauriri, which is an interesting term. It's Maori for angry wind, which is probably an appropriate description of the Bounty Islands and perhaps our opponents across the House. The third marine protected area will be the Motere Ihipuku, which is literally nose and belly. I tried to find out what an explanation of that would be, and the best Shane Jones could offer us, maybe it's about this government being belly up. Mr Speaker, the other 2 things that this bill does that are worthy of support, it provides for a review of the Campbell Islands Reserve in 5 years' time to consider protecting the remainder of the Campbell Island Territorial Sea by including all of it in the Marine Reserve, and I hope indeed that will happen in 5 years' time. The other thing it does, interestingly, is deem certain commanding officers of the New Zealand Defence Force to be rangers under the Marine Reserves Act 1971 in respect of the Marine Reserves. And that makes sense because the most frequent visitors to those island groups are, of course, the Royal New Zealand Navy, and they have a very positive role that they can play. The New Zealand Subantarctic Islands and their territorial seas have been internationally recognised for their outstanding conservation values. And indeed, back in 1998, we were proud that they were awarded World Heritage status. The marine reserves and the prohibitions on Danish seining, combined with the existing Fisheries Act and regulations prohibitions on bottom trawling and dredging, will provide those marine protected areas over the wider area of the territorial sea of the New Zealand Subantarctic Islands with the protection they need. There will be some impact on commercial activities. It will change the areas where commercial fishing for ling takes place, for example, and it will limit mineral-related activities. Prospecting, exploration and mining will be restricted to low-impact activities. And it is appropriate that we put constraints on those forms of exploitation. On the other side of the ledger, there will be real potential benefits for nature-based tourism in the area, Mr. Speaker. The proposal represents the first comprehensive opportunity to address New Zealand's World Heritage obligation in respect to the territorial seas around these island groups. Action was taken earlier in 2003 to fully protect as a marine reserve the territorial seas around the Auckland Islands. That was an initiative under the last government, and it was a good initiative. Why is this justified? Well, apart from the obvious factor that this has World Heritage status, each of these island groups is highly distinct biologically, geologically and geographically. Each has threatened and or endemic species living or breeding only on or around that particular island. And the islands and the surrounding waters have been subject to minimal human impact and are therefore, as ecosystems, very close to being pristine. It is in our interests as a country, and it is our obligation as a member of the world international community that we provide that protection. The land areas of the islands were, of course, protected way back in 1977 under the Reserves Act. The Auckland Islands and the sea around them were protected as a marine mammal sanctuary, again back in 1978, and the territorial sea, as I mentioned earlier, was fully protected in 2003. A marine protected areas policy was jointly developed between the Department of Conservation and the Ministry of Fisheries under the last Labor government and was released in January 2006. It provides the framework for protecting marine diversity by establishing a network of marine protected areas. Subantarctic Marines Protection Planning Forum was set up again under Labor in 2008. That gathered the information, it did the consultation, it heard the submissions and it presented the government with options. And the bill today is a product of government decisions made in December 2010. Mr. Speaker, we do have an obligation to meet the responsibilities associated with the World Heritage status listing. That means that we need to acknowledge that the natural sites are of a quality that is of global significance, and we must undertake to protect and conserve them on behalf of the world community. Labor will be fully supporting this legislation.
I call the honourable member Nicky Wagner.